Thank you, Edgar. And I'm glad you said there are only two experts because I know that these are the two sitting on my left right here. So you heard the introductions, the amazing bios of the two panelists. And so I think I'm not even going to lead into this with a question. I think we should just go ahead and get started. They're both going to talk about what they're doing right now around creativity, collaboration, making a difference, all the things you've been talking about all day. And it has been an amazing set of conversations and panels that took place up here. So I think we should give all the previous panelists a big round of applause again, because it's been really fun to watch and see what's going on here. So let's... And I'm glad that the questions about journalism were in the previous panel, and because that's a tough one, but I thought they did a great job answering those questions. So with that, why don't we just go ahead and get started? We're going to start with Reinhold, and Reinhold, can you just tell us a little about the work you're doing here in Brazil? And I know you've been here since 2010 from our conversation earlier, so let's hear and see a bit your presentation on your work here.
Sounds good. I'm going to stand up, because did you know that when you stand, you can have a better connection to people? And I hope I won't fall down. And I also would like to ask to get my presentation up on the screen. I fell in love with Brazil 4 years ago when I was working at the Universidade de São Paulo for 1 year. And I stayed on connected to Brazil. I started a company here in Brazil with a Brazilian colleague. And our relationship, Brazil and I, we're still in love, but reality has set in a little bit. I think trying to start a company does that. So I want to set the context around the concept of creativity. It sounds so much better in Portuguese, criatividade. Language is part of my love relationship with Brazil. And creativity is hot. Everyone wants to be creative, more and more. Everyone needs to be creative. And there are lots of books. There's a recent book published by the Kelly brothers, David and Tom Kelly. David is a professor at Stanford, but also has a side job. He started IDEO, one of the most famous innovation companies. There are MOOCs, if you go online. There are several MOOCs now starting up about creativity. And there's also a report published by IBM that says creativity is one of the main skills that companies now, or CEOs, are asking for. Stanford is now treating creativity almost like an equal to learning a foreign language. Here's a quote by John Hennessy: "We need to make creativity confidence a requirement at Stanford, just like a foreign language." So a lot of universities are now really revisiting creativity to prepare their next generation of innovators. There are lots of different definitions of creativity. The one that I like to use is the ability to think divergently, to create ideas, to explore many possible solutions. Now I want to share with you a little test. That test has been around for a while. Sir Ken Robinson, whom you might have met on TED. He talks also about this study when he talks about creativity. And it's a longitudinal study between 1973 and 1985. And I wish there were a more recent study, but my hunch is that the situation hasn't changed much. So they tested 1,600 crianças, children, and they tested the same groups every 5 years, and they also tested adults, 25 years and older, 280,000 adults. So at age 5, The students are doing pretty well. Over 90% of all the students were highly creative, using a test that was also used by NASA, testing horizontal thinking and also coming up with lots of ideas. Now, middle school, it went down to 30%, using the same test, the same groups. Now we're getting into high school, and it's down to 12%. And how are we doing, we adults? 2%. Now, this is kind of sad, isn't it? So I want to spend 1 minute. I want you to talk to your neighbor, find a common language. If you don't have one, create one. And I want you to discuss for 1 minute what happened. O que aconteceu? 1 minute. Go. Okay, that was a fast minute. I'm sure you have come up with lots of potential reasons. The next question would be, what are you going to do about it? The good news is that we're all creative, and the big challenge is how can we regain our creative confidence? So I want to share with you an interview on TED Radio. And I hope that the technology is going to work. I have created a prototype of a translation. It's not perfect, but it's good enough.
The thing that
And
stops people from doing it is
here we go.
exactly the same thing, which is fear. And what I've discovered over the years is not that you have to be fearless, because I don't believe in fearlessness and I don't advise it. I think the only truly fearless people that I've ever met were full-blown psychopaths or really reckless 3-year-olds, and I don't think we want to aspire to be either of those things. I think instead what you have to do is recognize that fear and creativity are conjoined twins. And what I see people doing in their lives is they're so afraid of their fear that they end up trying to kill it. And when they kill it, they also kill their creativity, because creativity is going into the uncertain, and the uncertain is always scary. And so what I've had to figure out how to do over the years is to create a sort of mental construct in which I make a lot of space to coexist with fear, to just say to it, hey, fear, listen, creativity and I, your conjoined twin sister, are about to go on a road trip. I understand you'll be joining us, because you always do. But you don't get to decide anything about this journey that we're going on. But you can come, and I know that you'll be in the back seat in panic, but we're going, mommy's driving, and we're going anyway. And you just take it along with you, and that seems to work for me.
So the work I do, and the work I did when I worked at Stanford until I came down to Brazil, was not focusing too much on creating innovative products, but really developing, creating innovators. How can you work with people to help them regain their creative confidence and competence? And fear is, as the writer here mentioned, fear is the twin brother, twin sister of creativity. They go together. And it's the main reason why we might not be as creative as we are. And of course, there are lots of different elements, players, variables that support creativity, communication, many tools and techniques, etc., etc. But the biggest part is fear. And that's what we focus on when I work with various organizations, helping them to rediscover their creative potential. There's a famous social psychologist, Albert Bandura, and his concept of self-efficacy is really what is helping us to redevelop, regain that creative confidence. Self-efficacy is defined as the strength of one's belief in one's own ability to complete tasks and reach goals. And the term that I like a lot and that I used way back when I was also working with students and teachers in teacher development was guided mastery. So in our workshops, when we work with organizations, we guide them through a series of steps which allows them to rediscover and regain their creative potential. And along the way, they also learn tools and techniques. They learn how to work in teams, collaborate. But the most important thing is tackle that twin sister, that twin brother, fear. And this is really at the core of creativity. So it's not focusing on tools and very linear and rigid processes, but it's really focusing more on the emotional aspect of the people that you work with. And with that, I want to pass it on to you.
So I'm just going to get started and we'll wing it. So the Community Innovators Lab at MIT, it's in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And we work with what we call socially marginalized communities. And we have this idea that there are two kinds of brilliance at work in what we do. The first is the lived experience of people who are struggling with social marginality. And we use the term social marginality pretty intentionally to avoid terms like poverty, which I used to use a lot. And we don't use that word anymore because though the idea of talking about poverty for me back when I used that term was that there was something structural about being poor. And what I meant by that was that policy choices, programs, political decisions, and agreements had constructed poorness for poor people, that there is nothing inherent in poor people that makes them poor. And then I realized that the term itself and this idea that it is structural takes away the human and moral element of it. And that poverty is actually a moral problem of the majority. And by that, I don't mean that some people are not nice to other people. I mean that somehow there's something wrong with our morality that enables us to feel that it is normal for abject suffering to happen among fellow human beings. So that's why I say that poverty is a moral problem, and that's something we have to address. And so the question it connects to in Reinhold's presentation is creativity and fear. What is the nature of fear in a social context, and what can we do about it? How can we overcome it to have what we call collaborative innovation, and innovation for the whole society, not just for people who are better educated and more well off. Oh, and here we are, but we are not at the beginning. Point it that way. Okay, it's magic, and it's not working. So I wanted to bring some of the people that we work with into this room, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So I will just have to talk about them, and you will have to imagine them. So for us, collaborative innovation is a way of, as I said before, bringing into societal processes, social change process, the genius of people who are living on the margins and having to struggle to make do, really at the cutting edges of change around climate change, in cities, all the things, all the systems that are changing in cities, everything from finance to transportation, all of the ways in which human settlements are adapting to resource scarcity and demographic change. So people living at the margins really understand how to innovate because they have to. And so the example I often give from the US is if you want to understand what is wrong with a police department, talk to black kids, black boys with hoodies. And they will, do you know what I mean when I say black boys with hoodies? Okay. Oh. I'm seeing flash down here parts of the presentation, but I think let us not bother with the presentation. So black boys with hoodies can tell you a lot about what's wrong with police departments. And so we say that if you are living on the margins, you understand a lot about institutional failure, and therefore you can understand a lot and have a lot of insights and suggestions for institutional change. So Colab works and tries to connect changes in cities with opportunities for wealth creation at the margins. And I just want to quickly go to two examples, one in Central America and one in the US. So the one in Central America is in a couple of places in remote islands where communities of trash pickers, mainly women, are organizing cooperative businesses trying to build livelihoods out of living and working in the dumps, and they are collecting recyclables. They are doing two things at once. They are simply trying to feed their families, and at the same time, actually, they are taking on major global challenges in ways that solve both problems. So in a small island community off the coast of Nicaragua, a co-op of women is organizing a recycling route that pulls waste out of the water and allows them to sell it to make a livelihood. We at Colab work with them to do a couple of things: to change their business models to make them more efficient, to develop plastic chippers in collaboration with the engineering department at MIT that were mobile and could help them move their products up the value chain. And we also work with the logistics department at MIT to improve their recycling carts. And once they improve their recycling carts, they could actually go to the mayor and say, we can improve your recycling because we can get into these narrow alleys and find trash, and we're highly motivated to do this because we have to pay our children's school fees with our income. So we find trash and we improve your recycling route. And at the same time, you know, there's the trash floating in the ocean. You guys must have heard after the Malaysia flight crash, these islands of garbage the size of entire states. Well, these women in this small little place are actually taking that question on, trying to figure out how to keep plastic, how to keep metals out of the water and do it in a way that earns them a livelihood. So we call them global leaders and global innovators. And they do that work together, collaborating with all of the stakeholders in their ecosystem that need to be part of this solution of pulling trash out of the water. So they're working with the mayors, they're working with the middlemen who sell the trash on the market. So that's one example. The second example is in the Bronx, New York. Are you guys familiar with the Bronx? Has anybody ever heard of the Bronx here? Cool, okay. So I'm actually from the Bronx originally. The Bronx is the poorest urban county in the United States. And it is right next to Wall Street. It is right next to Manhattan, one of the great financial centers in the world. It is a place of really dismal educational statistics, and yet it is the home to many universities. It has some of the worst health outcomes, and it is home to many hospitals. And it has the world's second largest food distribution center, and it is a food desert itself. So the question for community organizers in the Bronx was, how do we actually capture the wealth that exists in this place and turn it back into the community and enable it to improve the lives and livelihoods of people who actually live in the Bronx and who are actually creating this wealth. And what they came to was that there was an absence of coordination. It's not a problem of assets in the place in which they live. It is a problem of prejudice. It is a problem of hatred of people, of minorities, and of poor people. And it is a problem of ignorance, of a lack of knowledge about what assets exist in the communities that are right there in the midst of these institutions that produce or that circulate so much wealth. So we began a process. This is where the planning discipline, urban planning, is really, really essential. Nobody had ever mapped all of the assets that exist in the Bronx from the viewpoint of the people who live there themselves. And nobody had ever sat with them and said, if you could create an economy that really promoted your health and your wellness and your creativity and your productivity, what would you choose to build? And so Colab, the Community Innovators Lab, came in and we threw a bunch of students into the Bronx. And we had them go around and map where all the major institutions were. Where was the public housing? Where were the museums? Where were the hospitals? Where were the big energy users? And what kind of distributed energy system could be created if all of the big energy users sat together and figured out, how do we conserve? And how do we build a distributed system? And where is the role for community ownership in a distributed system? And they went sector by sector. They went to the hospitals and looked at the procurement streams of the hospitals and figured out what do you need that we can make? How about food? You know, there's a lot of great cooking experience of people in the Bronx. Why can't we have a commercial kitchen and start producing food? And on and on and on. But the main obstacle to addressing this societal marginality was a lack of coordination, a lack of a space where people could actually come together, explore where their interests might meet, even though they seemed so far apart. And what kinds of technical tools would you need to actually facilitate that meeting? So that, to my mind, and at Colab for us, is a critical intervention in how to address social marginality in a way that lifts up the expertise of socially marginalized people and puts their leadership at the table with all of the other decision makers so that they can help to unlock the full range of assets available and necessary now for development and for change in the world now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dayna. And in the spirit of social good, we're going to start taking some questions from social media. So I'm going to have Vanessa come up and join us. And we'll try and swap headsets from us up here that need them as we go to the questions. But before we start going to those questions, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask a couple kind of follow-up questions that I've been thinking about listening to the conversations. And I'll start with Reinhold quickly. You know, Reinhold, you talked about the creativity situation, and you know, you're working here and spending a lot of your time in Brazil now, and been here for 4 years, as you indicated. But you've really lived all over the world, and including sort of in the heart of creative technologies in Silicon Valley. I mean, where would you place Brazil in the space of the creative effort, of the creative minds and bringing it together?
There is tremendous creativity here. You just have to allow yourself to be creative. So I do believe that creativity is with us and it's everywhere. Silicon Valley does not have a monopoly on that. There are some principles and key aspects that support the fact that why Silicon Valley is so creative and why universities like MIT and Stanford and Harvard and other universities are doing a really good job in creating the next generation of innovators. But it's no rocket science, and the work I do here, we do here in Brazil, is guided by some of the work that has been done at Stanford, and the term is design thinking. It's another hot, sexy methodology, but a lot of it is common sense. And when I work here in Brazil with Brazilians, either at the university or in the non-government, in the government sector or in the NGO sectors, but also with companies, it's not that I'm trying to copy what was developed at Stanford or at other universities up north or south. It's really focusing on the key principles of empathy. If you want to create innovative solutions to complex challenges, be they social, and social challenges, cities, smart cities, are wonderfully suited for this because the challenges are so incredibly challenging. But also for companies and for the government, empathy is absolutely crucial to be able to understand the needs and the context of the key stakeholders of the ecosystem or the problem that you are trying to design for. And don't design for it, design it with them. Colab, cooperative, participatory design. The other thing is innovation and creativity is social. The more people with different perspectives you bring together, and if you have good practices in place to facilitate these teams, the power is amazing. Ambiguity is something that we don't like. I don't like ambiguity, like most people don't like it. But if you want to be creative, you have to embrace ambiguity and you have to take that risk. And the fear is really, I'm coming back to the fear, is, yeah, you are going to make a lot of mistakes. But these are not mistakes. These are really opportunities to take your ideas further. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thanks, Reinhold. And Dayna, I just always find it fascinating when I hear a presentation that talks about, talking to the people that your programs are going to affect and actually getting feedback from them and what they need and how it could be delivered better for them. It seems so simple, but it's amazing how often it happens that those stakeholders are the ones that are left out. And we have, either government officials or other power brokers in communities making decisions for people that aren't going to work. And I mean, at Colab, you're breaking down barriers. You're trying to create these opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those barriers are and how you go about breaking them down? Because I know they're there.
So I would start by saying that actually we don't, we co-create the programs with communities. It's not right. So we are not even beginning to design the programs. We are asking them, what are we doing? How do we create something together? The biggest obstacle is social distance. That people, for example, who are working in the dumps are completely foreign and apart from the people working in City Hall. They are all of the things you can imagine about what people think about garbage pickers is true, and the thought that they have intelligence and creativity is just not, it's not a thought that operates in policymakers or decision makers' minds. But the women in the dumps in Nicaragua had set up their own businesses before we got there. And they didn't need our help to create businesses. They needed our help with the plastic chipper. They needed an engineer. They needed a logistician. They have actually taught us how to develop materials for low literacy business development. If you don't know how to read, but you're a hell of a business person, how do you communicate and how do you keep records and how do you think about building a business? They have taught us that, and since they speak Spanish, and many people in the Bronx speak Spanish and also have literacy challenges, they're helping us figure out how to build businesses in the Bronx from this tiny little island. So I think the biggest obstacle is this social distance, which it's like a lack of social imagination and a lack of empathy that makes it impossible for people to imagine people who are not like them as colleagues, as collaborators, as neighbors, as loved ones, and as essential to solving the problems facing the world now that are, that are huge and unknown.
It's connecting. It's a lot about what we're talking about here. It's connecting, but connecting throughout the whole system so that you're satisfying the needs of the people that we're trying to help and make a difference with. And at the same time, they end up always helping us. So, so Vanessa, what's happening out there in social world?
I'm going to do this. I'm going to make the questions in Portuguese and understand and listen to them in English. So, we have two questions. The first, it comes from Dengue Melo. And Hobson said that in TEDx, they say that schools destroy the creativity and the passion of kids. How do we change that?
It's a systemic challenge, and the solution has to be systemic. And it won't happen in one country or in many countries or in most countries overnight or over a generation. But I have worked many, many years with teachers, mostly middle and high school teachers, and also in the area of teacher professional development. And that's one way where you can make a big difference. The most important variable in education is the teacher and teacher preparation. Then, of course, you have to think about the larger context, whether it's policy on a municipal level, on a state level, on a federal level. Those policy decisions have an impact on every piece in the puzzle. You also need to address infrastructure. Remember some of the photos I showed you with the chairs lined up? It's hard, it's not impossible, it's a challenge. It's hard to engage students in creative, open-ended problem-solving, let me see if I can add another buzzword, active learning activities, if you line them up in such a way that almost looks like the industrial age. We have to move beyond, and a lot of people know that. So there are opportunities. Start with small steps while at the same time talk to everyone in the system to work towards a solution, a systemic solution that really allows children to bring their creative ability that they have, their playfulness, the fact that they work in small groups in lower grades, allow for those things. And I think, I'm hopeful that you can bring creativity back into the schools, but it's a huge challenge.
I have one more question, and the question comes from Sartaj. His speaker tomorrow says, poverty is a systemic and moral problem, but this mixing of fear and creativity cannot create, what, a tribe of innovators, maybe?
You want to tackle that one?
Sure. The combination of fear and creativity, can it create a tribe of innovators. So I think human beings are a tribe of innovators. I think it is endemic to the human condition that we will figure out a way of improving our situation. And I think that the fear that is most important and most disabling is fear of the other. And I think that there has to be a very explicit encounter with that fear and an explicit engagement at a deeper level with the humanity of people beyond that fear. And so I would say, yes, we are innovators by nature, and there is a project ahead of us, a doable project, but the project is using our creativity to overcome the fear.
Great. I'm looking up at the clock. We have almost 2 minutes, and I'm going to do a final sort of speed Twitter round and ask for very quick answers. And I think we've covered sort of creativity, communication, collaboration, sort of 3 C's of working together and making a difference. And so I'm going to ask each of you, first to Reinhold, to overcome that fear and be creative. What is the one piece of advice that you would have for the Social Good Brazil audience?
I had the pleasure to work with Social Good Brazil, and I think it's working with people to recognize their mindsets. We all have our set ways of thinking and doing things, and then to engage all of us in small steps where we can say that our mindsets are actually in the way of doing things, in the way of working together, and then finding ways to adjust these mindsets. It's possible.
And Dayna, on collaboration, what is the one thing that we can all do a better job of in terms of thinking about collaboration and actually meeting the needs of people?
So I think we have to jump in and work on things together. The world is in bad shape, and we need every single hand on deck. And so I think when you get in and start working with people on projects and you are open to the intelligence that they bring, you will, it kind of lessens the social distance, and you will figure out what piece of the solution each person is bringing and how valuable that is, and see beyond your own special direct interests to a larger field of possibility.